They rejected me from the beginning and called me a gold digger because I was poor and marrying a billionaire's daughter. But when she died shortly after we separated, I quietly raised our daughter with the sweat of my labor. On the day of the will reading, they discovered, "My name is Daniel Parker, and for 5 years I was married to Sophia Hampton, daughter of billionaire Richard Hampton. Our meeting was simple. I was just the baker who supplied bread and pastries for her company's events. Sophia would stop by my bakery every morning before heading to the office. One day, she arrived earlier than usual and caught me working the dough. Something about the process fascinated her, and she asked to learn. From then on, she'd come an hour before opening just to watch me work. We fell in love gradually. She never mentioned her family's financial empire, and I had no idea who she truly was until our third date, when a photographer caught us leaving a small restaurant. The next morning, my face was splashed across the tabloids. Hampton. Heiress finds love with local baker. The bakery phone rang that same afternoon. Richard Hampton wanted to meet me. Naively, I thought it might be a cordial introduction. "How much do you want?" were his first words when I sat in his luxurious office. "Excuse me," I replied, genuinely confused. "To walk away from my daughter. Name your price." He opened his drawer and pulled out a checkbook. "Everyone has a price, Mr. Parker." I stood up immediately. "With all due respect, Mr. Hampton, I'm not interested in your money. I'm interested in your daughter." He laughed, the kind of laugh only people accustomed to power can give. "Nobody turns down money, especially someone in your situation. Do you know how much Sophia spends in a month? More than you make in a year. Be realistic." "I apologize, but I need to get back to work." I left without looking back, even as he shouted that I would regret it. When I told Sophia about the encounter, she didn't seem surprised. "He's done this with every man I've dated, and they all took the offer." She held my hands, her eyes searching mine. "You're the first to say no." In the months that followed, the pressure only increased. The Hampton family was influential. Suddenly, my suppliers began cancelling. Contracts won, the bank denied renewal of the bakery loan, and I received an absurd increase in the property's rent. The message was clear: step away or be crushed. When I proposed to Sophia, it wasn't a romantic gesture in an expensive restaurant. Hastia, it happened in the bakery kitchen while she helped me prepare dough for the next day. I didn't have a diamond ring, just a simple band that had belonged to my mother. "This is all I have to offer," I said honestly. "A simple life. Honest." "Work out and all my love," Sophia cried as she slipped on the ring. "It's more than anyone has ever offered me." We married in a small ceremony. Of the Hamptons, only Sophia's younger brother Michael attended. During the reception, Richard Hampton called his daughter's cell phone. "You have 24 hours to come to your senses," he said, loud enough for me to hear. "After that, you're disinherited." Sophia hung up. He doesn't understand that money isn't everything. With the bakery facing financial difficulties thanks to the Hamptons' influence, I had to start over. We opened a smaller bakery in another neighborhood where her last name wasn't as well known. Sophia, who always had employees for everything, learned to serve customers, do accounting, and mop floors. I never once heard her complain. After 2 years, she became pregnant. Emma's arrival was the happiest moment of our lives, but it was also the beginning of the end for our marriage. With a baby, the differences in our upbringings began to weigh on us. I had grown up with the basics: food on the table, public, education, second-hand clothes. For me, Emma had everything she needed: love, security, a home. For Sophia, it was difficult to accept that our daughter wouldn't have the opportunities she'd had. "I don't want her to grow up with limitations," Sophia would say during our arguments about money. "I want her to have choices, to study wherever she wants, to do whatever she wants." "She will have choices," I'd argue back, the frustration building inside me. "She'll just have to work for them, like most people do." These arguments became more frequent and intense. Sophia started talking about returning to the corporate world to earn more. I felt inadequate, as if everything I could offer wasn't enough. As much as we loved each other, Reality was harsh. We had grown up in different worlds with different values. The breaking point came when Emma was 3. Richard Hampton, tired of waiting for his daughter to come to her senses, sent a formal proposal. He would forgive Sophia if she returned to the family business and ensured private education for Emma. I wouldn't need to be part of the equation. He would accept that Sophia remained married to me as long as Emma had the education she deserved. To my surprise, Sophia considered the proposal. "It's not for me, Daniel. It's for Emma." "Your father is manipulating us," I argued, feeling a cold fear creep into my chest. "He's using Emma to bring you back. What if he is? What matters is that she'll have opportunities." The discussion dragged on for weeks. We eventually agreed that Emma would attend the school chosen by her grandfather, but would continue living with us. It was a compromise, but I felt I had lost something important. Slowly, Sophia was reabsorbed into the Hampton world. She started working part-time in her father's companies, then full-time. She returned to attending high society events while I stayed home with Emma. We were like two planets in increasingly distant orbits. One night, after returning late from an event, Sophia sat on the edge of our bed and said, "I don't know if I can continue living in these two worlds." I knew what that meant before she even continued. We had fought, but in the end, the weight of our differences was greater than our love. We agreed to an amicable separation with shared custody of Emma. It was 3 months after the separation that Sophia received her diagnosis: ovarian cancer, advanced stage. The doctor gave her a year, maybe less. "I don't want you to hear this from someone else," she told me over the phone, her voice surprisingly steady. "And I don't want Emma to see me waste away. It would be better if she spent more time with you in the coming months." "That's not what this is about," I replied, my heart breaking all over again. "What do you need?" There was a long silence. "I'm not asking for anything, Daniel. I'm not offering because you asked. I'm offering because, regardless of what happened between us, you're the mother of my daughter, and because I still care." The next day, I was by her side at the first chemotherapy session. Richard Hampton appeared, surprised to find me there. For the first time, there was no hostility in his gaze, just the fear of a father about to lose a daughter. "Why are you here?" he asked when Sophia was sleeping under the effect of the medications. "For the same reason you are," I replied simply. The following months were a roller coaster. I organized the bakery so I could spend more time with Emma and accompany Sophia to treatments. I carried a confused daughter who didn't understand why her mother was losing her hair, and held the hand of a brave woman as she vomited after each session. The Hampton family hired the best specialists, but the cancer was aggressive. Within 6 months, Sophia was confined to a hospital bed. Even so, she insisted on seeing Emma regularly, though the visits grew increasingly shorter. "Thank you," she told me one afternoon when we were alone in the hospital room, her once vibrant face now hollow and pale, "for not walking away even after everything." "It's not walking away that defines a person," I answered, fighting back tears. "It's staying when it would be easier to leave." Richard Hampton found me in the hallway that day. "I don't understand you, Parker. After how we treated you, after the divorce, why are you still here?" I looked at the man who had despised me so much and saw only a broken father. "You think everything in life has a price or a strategy, but some things simply are what they are. I love your daughter, not in a way that worked for a marriage, but enough to be here when she needs me." He shook his head, unable to comprehend. Sophia passed away on a spring morning. Emma was with me at the bakery when I received the call. I closed the shop, took my daughter in my arms, and cried like I'd never cried before. At the funeral, Emma and I stood in the back. The Hampton family occupied the front row, a display of power even in grief. After the ceremony, I tried to approach to leave a bouquet of sunflowers on the coffin, Sophia's favorite flowers. Richard Hampton blocked my path. "What do you think you're doing?" he asked, his voice low but charged with anger. "Oh, I was saying goodbye," I replied simply. "You already got what you wanted from her, now it ends." I looked at this man in his impeccable suit, surrounded by security and yes-men, and felt only pity. You never understood, did you? It was never about money. Everything is about money, he shot back. I picked up Emma and left without looking back. In the days that followed, I returned to my routine, waking up at 4 a.m., preparing dough, baking bread, serving customers, picking up Emma from school, making dinner, telling stories, putting her to bed, the life of a single father, without luxuries or conveniences. A week after the funeral, I received a court notification. The Hampton family was filing for custody of Emma, claiming I didn't have the adequate conditions to raise her properly. So they're offering a deal, my lawyer explained. Shared custody, with Emma living primarily with her grandparents. No, I responded without hesitation. Emma stays with me. The following months were an exhausting legal battle. The Hamptons hired the best lawyers, presented reports about the inadequate conditions in which I was raising Emma. The small apartment above the bakery, the lack of a full-time nanny, the public school. You could lose everything, my lawyer warned. They have infinite resources to prolong this. Then let's prolong it, I answered, because I won't give up on my daughter. Almost a year after Sophia's death, I received a summons to the reading of her will. I found it strange. Normally, this would happen right after the funeral. When I questioned my lawyer, he seemed as surprised as I was. There were complications, was all he said. On the designated day, I entered the lawyer's office with Emma by my hand. The Hampton family was already there, all wearing serious expressions. Richard Hampton didn't deign to look in my direction. Sophia's lawyer, a man named Douglas Hayes, seemed uncomfortable when he began to speak. This is the last will and testament of Sophia Hampton Parker, revised 3 weeks before her death. What followed left the entire room in stunned silence. Douglas Hayes cleared his throat as the room fell silent. I, Sophia Hampton Parker, being of sound mind and by my own free will, leave all my personal properties, investments, and royalty rights to Hampton Technologies, divided as follows. 50% to my daughter Emma Parker, to be managed by a trust fund until she turns 25. The other 50% to my ex-husband, Daniel Parker, without any restrictions or conditions. Richard Hampton stood up abruptly, his face flushed. With anger. This is absurd. She was under heavy medication. She wasn't in any condition to make decisions of this magnitude. Mr. Hampton, Douglas responded calmly, the will was witnessed by 2 independent doctors who confirmed your daughter was perfectly lucid when signing. Patricia Hampton. Sophia's mother began crying quietly. Her siblings exchanged incredulous looks. Continue, Richard ordered. Douglas cleared his throat before resuming. I also leave a letter to be read publicly during the execution of this will, in the presence of all attendees. The lawyer removed a sealed envelope from a folder. My hands trembled as I held Emma, who played distractedly with my shirt buttons, oblivious to the drama unfolding. Dear family, Douglas began reading. If you're hearing this, it means I've lost my battle with cancer. First, I want you to know that I loved each of you, with all your flaws and qualities. Dad, you gave me everything money could buy, but never understood that some things are priceless. During my illness, when I was at my most vulnerable, only one person stood by me unconditionally. Not out of interest, as we were already divorced. Not out of obligation, as legally he owed me nothing. It was Daniel who held my hand. During chemotherapy, it was he who cleaned my face when I vomited for hours on end. It was he who slept in uncomfortable hospital chairs so I wouldn't spend the night alone. You rejected him from the start, called him a gold digger, a fortune hunter. You did everything to separate us and, when you couldn't, tried to make our life impossible. In the end, it was the pressure of this life divided between 2 worlds that destroyed our marriage. It wasn't lack of love. While I was dying, I had much time to reflect on what truly matters. Money bought the best doctors, but didn't. Give me more time. The family's influence opened doors to exclusive hospitals, but didn't stop the cancer from spreading. In the end, what brought me comfort was the simple, genuine, and selfless support from a man who, despite everything, has never stopped caring. This is my last wish, not revenge. It's recognition of who truly stood by me when I needed it most. It's also my way of ensuring that Emma, my precious daughter, grows up with values that matter: integrity, compassion, and unconditional love. Values I learned too late from her father. Daniel. You're probably surprised by this. You never asked for anything, which is why I'm giving everything. Not to prove something to my family, but because you deserve it. I trust you'll use this money wisely to raise our daughter and build a good life for you both. Please don't fight over this. I've already lost too much time seeing people. I love in conflict. Make peace, if not for yourselves, for Emma. She deserves to know all sides of her family. With eternal love, Sophia. When Douglas finished reading, the silence was heavy as lead. Emma looked up at me, sensing my emotion, and placed her small hand on my face. Daddy sad. I swallowed the lump in my throat. No, sweetheart. Daddy's just remembering Mommy. Richard Hampton remained motionless, staring at the lawyer. This will be contested, he finally said, his voice controlled but full of anger. My daughter was not in her right mind. You have that right, Douglas replied. But I should warn you that Sophia anticipated this reaction. She filmed the signing of the will, with doctors attesting to her mental capacity. She also left detailed records of all previous attempts to interfere in her marriage, and, subsequently, in Emma's upbringing. I looked at Douglas with surprise. Sophia had never mentioned these records. He gave me a quick glance, as if apologizing for keeping me in the dark as well. Documents that, should this will be contested, would have to be presented publicly in court, Douglas added. Richard's face paled. I realized there was more to this story than I knew, something the Hamptons didn't want to come to light. Patricia Hampton placed her hand on her husband's arm. Richard, please, we've already lost Sophia. Let's not lose Emma too. Looking at my daughter, I felt a wave of protection wash over me. It wasn't about the money, it never was. It was about the right to raise my daughter without interference, without them trying to turn her into something she might not want to be. Mr. Hampton, I finally said, my voice firmer than I expected. I don't want your money. I never did. All I ask is that you respect Sophia's wishes and let me raise Emma in peace. She will always be your granddaughter. I will never prevent you from being part of her life. Richard stared at me for long seconds. I saw something change. In his gaze, not acceptance, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. This isn't over, he said, standing up. Sarkamiku, Patricia. The Hamptons left in silence, leaving only Emma, myself, and Douglas in the room. Will they contest? I asked when we were sure they were gone. Douglas sighed. They'll probably try. But Sophia was extremely careful. She really did keep records of everything. The threats, the attempts to sabotage your bakery, even recordings of conversations where your father-in-law offered money for you to leave her. I had no idea. She wanted to protect you and Emma, ensure you had a fair chance. He hesitated. Fuatu, there's something else you need to know. Sophia didn't just leave money for you. She transferred 15% of Hampton Technologies shares to your name and another 15% to Emma 3 days before she died. These are voting shares. I felt the ground shift beneath my feet. Hampton Technologies was $1 billion company. This meant you and Emma are now the second largest shareholders after Richard. Douglas continued, he's still the majority holder, but he can't make important decisions without your vote. Why would she do that? I asked, stunned. She knew. Her father? She knew he might contest a will, freeze accounts, drag the process out for years, but the shares are already in your name, registered and irrevocable. It was the only way she found to ensure you had the power to negotiate on equal terms. I left the office with Emma, my mind in turmoil. In a matter of hours, I had gone from a baker struggling to pay bills to one of the main shareholders of one of the country's largest technology companies. In the days that followed, I returned to my routine as if nothing had happened. I woke up early, made bread, raised my daughter. The Hampton lawyers tried to contact me several times, but I asked Douglas to deal with them. I wasn't ready to face what that inheritance meant. 2 weeks after the will reading, I was closing the bakery when I saw a luxury car park in front. Richard Hampton got out, alone, without security or assistance. "Can we talk?" he asked, looking strangely vulnerable. I hesitated, but agreed. "Emma's sleeping upstairs. Let's keep it down." We sat at the empty bakery tables. He looked around, clearly uncomfortable with the simplicity of the place. "I had you investigated," he began bluntly. "When you and Sophia first got involved, and again during the divorce, and once more after she fell ill." I remained silent, waiting for him to continue. "I looked for anything: hidden debts, vices, problematic previous relationships, something that would prove you were with her for the money." He paused, "but I found nothing. Just a hard-working man who loves his daughter, and who, for some incomprehensible reason, stayed by my daughter's side even when he no longer had any obligation." "It's not that incomprehensible," I replied. "I loved her. I still do. In a way, and she's the mother of my child." Richard seemed to be fighting an internal battle. "Do you know what those shares Sophia left you mean? That I have some decision-making power in the company?" He gave a dry laugh. "It's much more than that. There's a clause in the company's bylaws that says any shareholder with more than 25% of shares can appoint board members." He looked directly at me. "You and Emma together have 30%. I began to understand the magnitude of the situation. It wasn't just about money. It was about control of the company Richard had built over decades. "I have no interest in interfering in your business," I said sincerely. "I never wanted to be part of that world. But now you are," he replied, "whether you want it or not." We sat in silence for a few minutes. I could feel the weight of the decisions I would need to make, not just for myself, but for Emma. "What do you want, Parker?" he finally asked. "Name your price to sell those shares back to me." I looked at this powerful man, now forced to negotiate with me, the baker he had so despised. "I don't want your money, Mr. Hampton. I just want to raise my daughter in peace. I want her to know both sides of her family. I want her to have choices in life, but also learn the value of hard work." "Noble," he replied with a touch of sarcasm. "But everyone has a price. That's the problem. You've always thought everything, and everyone can be bought." I glanced at the staircase leading to our small apartment, where Emma slept. "Some things simply aren't for sale." Richard Hampton studied me for a long time, as if trying to decipher a puzzle. "You're a strange man, Parker. Just a man trying to do right by his daughter." He rose to leave, but stopped at the door. "Patricia would like to see Emma. She misses her granddaughter very much." It was my turn to be surprised. It was the closest Richard Hampton would come to a peace offering. "Emma asks about her grandparents," I replied. "Maybe a Sunday lunch." Nothing formal, just family. Something like relief passed through his eyes. "Sunday, then." After he left, I went upstairs to Emma's room. She slept peacefully, hugging the teddy bear Sophia had given her. I sat on the edge of the bed, watching her soft breathing. "So your mother knew what she was doing," I whispered. "She made sure you had everything, not just the money, but the chance to know both worlds and choose your own path." Emma stirred in her sleep, and for a moment I saw Sophia in her, the same determination in her chin, the same way of furrowing her brow while dreaming. The following Sunday, the Hamptons came to our apartment for lunch. It was strange and uncomfortable at first. They clearly weren't used to the simplicity of our home, but Emma was radiant to have her grandparents there. She showed them her drawings, her toys, and even convinced her grandfather to sit on the floor to play with building blocks. Watching that unlikely scene, Richard Hampton, the billionaire magnate, sitting on the living room carpet building towers with his granddaughter, I realized that Sophia had achieved what she wanted. It wasn't about money or power. It was about breaking barriers, about uniting two worlds for Emma's sake. That night, as I put away the toys scattered around the living room, I found the photo album Sophia had put together during her pregnancy. On the last page, a note written by her that I had never noticed before. "For Emma, your father taught me that true wealth isn't measured by bank accounts, but by the love we give and receive. I hope you grow up with the best of both worlds." The determination of a Hampton and the heart of a Parker. For the first time since Sophia's death, I cried without restraint, not just from sadness, but from gratitude. Even at the end, she had thought of everything, not to take revenge on her family, but to build bridges that would allow our daughter to have a future without the divisions that marked our relationship. The battle over the will was far from over, but at that moment, I felt we had already taken the first step toward the peace Sophia so desired. In the weeks following the Sunday lunch, a strange routine began to establish itself. Patricia Hampton called almost daily to check on Emma, sometimes picking her up after school and bringing her back before dinner. Richard B., though more reserved Itzhakis, occasionally appeared at the bakery, always arriving early when there were few customers. "I never thought I'd learn to appreciate the smell of fresh bread," he commented one morning while watching me work the dough. There was something different about him now, a vulnerability he'd never shown before. The meetings with the Hamptons were far from comfortable, but for Emma's sake, we were all making an effort. However, the legal battle continued behind the scenes. Richard's lawyers tried to find loopholes in the will, while Douglas held firm to Sophia's position. A month after the will reading, I received an official notification. As a Hampton Technologies shareholder, my presence was required at the next board meeting. It was a world I didn't know and frankly had no interest in knowing. But the shares were in my name and Emma's, and this was Sophia's legacy that I couldn't simply ignore. "You need a suit," Douglas told me when I called him in panic. "And you need to understand at least the basics of what the company does." In the days that followed, I immersed myself in financial reports and corporate presentations. It was like learning a new language: EBITDA, financial leverage, market share, terms that had never been part of my baker's vocabulary. Emma found me asleep over the papers several nights, waking me with a small kiss on the cheek. On the morning of the meeting, I wore the only suit I owned, the same one I had worn to Sophia's funeral. I left Emma with a trusted neighbor and took the bus to the financial district. The contrast couldn't have been greater. Me, a baker, with flour permanently embedded under my fingernails, heading to the headquarters of a billion-dollar company. Hampton Technologies occupied the top 10 floors of a mirrored skyscraper. At reception, I stated my name and purpose. The receptionist looked at me with a mixture of surprise and curiosity. "Mr. Parker, Mr. Hampton asked that you be taken directly to the boardroom when you arrived." A security guard escorted me to the executive elevator. On the 45th floor, I was led through elegant corridors to a room with glass walls. Inside, about 12 people in impeccable business attire were already seated around a huge table. Richard Hampton was at the head, with Michael, Sophia's younger brother, to his right. When I entered, all conversations ceased. I felt evaluating gazes, some curious, others clearly hostile. Richard stood up. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Daniel Parker, my daughter Sophia's ex-husband and current holder of 15% of the company's shares." His voice was neutral, professional. "As stipulated in the bylaws, he has the right to attend board meetings." Murmurs traveled around the table. A woman of about 50, with grey hair severely pulled back in a bun, Syed looked at me over her glasses. "Mr. Parker, I understand you are a baker." The condescending tone was palpable. "Yes, ma'am," I replied simply, determined not to be intimidated. "I've had a bakery in the West Side neighborhood for 7 years." "Fascinating," Sanchi retorted, in the same way someone would comment on a curious insect. "And what experience do you bring to this table in terms of corporate management, finance, or technology?" Before I could respond, Michael intervened. "Evelyn, and I think we're forgetting that Daniel is here by legal right, not specific qualifications." I felt grateful to Michael. Among all the Hamptons, he had always been the most receptive to my relationship with Sophia. "In any case," continued Richard, "we have important matters to address. First item on the agenda, the acquisition proposal for Start Vision. For the next 2 hours, I felt like I was watching a movie in a foreign language. Although I had studied the basic terms, the speed and complexity of the discussions were overwhelming. They dealt with millions of dollars with the same casualty. I would talk about bags of flour. During the break, I stood isolated in a corner, watching groups form. It was clear there were alliances and rivalries there. Years of corporate. Politics I didn't understand. Michael approached, offering me a coffee. "How are you feeling?" "Like a fish in the desert," I confessed. He laughed. "Believe me, we all felt that way at first. Even Sophia. Sophia worked here. For 5 years, before she met you." He seemed surprised by my surprise. "She never told you. She was brilliant in marketing. Developed several of the company's most successful campaigns." I realized, not for the first time, how many gaps there were in my knowledge about Sophia. During our marriage, she rarely talked about her life before me, as if she wanted to keep the two worlds separate. When the meeting resumed, a new proposal was presented. Hampton Technologies planned to close one of its smaller factories in the neighboring state and transfer production to a larger, more automated facility. "This will mean laying off about 400 employees," I'd explained the CFO, a woman named Jennifer. "But it will represent annual savings of $20 million in operating costs." "And what happens to those employees?" I asked, speaking for the first time since the meeting began. Jennifer looked at me as if I had asked an absurdly naive question. They'll receive severance packages as per legislation, of course. Many of them have worked for us for over 15 years, added Michael, consulting the report. Voice of the factory is practically the only major employer in that town. "It's a difficult decision, but necessary," interjected Richard. "Shareholders expect continuous growth, and we can't maintain inefficient operations out of sentimentality." Something stirred inside me. I thought of the families of those 400 workers, many probably with children to support, mortgages to pay. How much do these $20 million represent in the company's total profit? Jennifer seemed irritated by the question. "Approximately 1.2% of annual profit. And there are no alternatives. Cost reduction in other areas, perhaps a review of executive bonuses." I knew I was treading on dangerous ground, but I couldn't contain myself. A tense silence fell over the room. Evelyn, the woman who had questioned me at the beginning, gave a short, dry laugh. "Mr. Parker, I understand this is your first meeting, but perhaps it's better to observe and learn before suggesting how we should run a billion-dollar company." I felt my face heat up. "With all due respect, ma'am, perhaps it's precisely because I haven't spent years in this environment that I can see the complete picture. You're talking about 400 lives as if they were just numbers on a spreadsheet." "Daniel," Richard's voice had a warning tone, "this is not a charity. It's a business built by people," I retorted. "Sophia always told me that her father used to visit all the factories personally, that he knew the names of the longest-serving employees. That's how Hampton Technologies grew, wasn't it? With mutual loyalty and respect." Richard stared at me for a long time. For a moment, I saw a flash of something in his eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or guilt. "We'll postpone this decision until the next meeting," he finally said. "Jennifer, I want a detailed report on alternatives that might preserve at least some of these jobs. Michael, visit the factory personally and talk to the local managers." When the meeting ended, some board members left quickly, but others approached to introduce themselves. I realized that my intervention, however amateur, had made an impression, for some clearly negative, for others curiously positive. Richard asked me to stay after everyone left. "You have no idea what game you're playing, Parker," he said when we were alone. "This corporate world is not for well-meaning amateurs." "I'm not trying to play any game," I answered sincerely. "I just said what I believe is right." He poured himself a drink from the discreet bar in the corner of the room, offering me one which I declined. "Sophia used to do that too, you know. Question decisions that everyone considered obvious, never in the direct way you did. Today, but she had her methods." He took a sip. "That made her a brilliant executive, but it also cost her important allies. You think I made enemies today? Certainly. Evelyn Blackwood, our operations director, considers feelings as weakness. Jennifer Zhao, our CFO, lives and breathes numbers. By questioning the layoff of employees, you basically attacked their competence." I sighed. "That wasn't my intention." "Intentions matter little in this environment." Richard walked to the window, looking at the city. "Below," What intrigues me is, why do you care? These people mean nothing to you. You could just sit there, receive your dividends, and continue baking bread. The question caught me by surprise. Because it's the right thing to do. Because they're real people with families, just like me and Emma. Richard shook his head, as if I were a naive child. You really believe that, don't you? That the world can work on the basis of kindness and consideration. I believe there can be a balance between profitability and humanity. Yes. He looked at me with an expression I couldn't decipher. Sophia believed the same. That's why she would have been my natural successor, despite her occasional idealisms. This revelation surprised me. Sashi never mentioned that. Because she chose another path, she chose you. There was no accusation in his voice now, just observation. Sometimes I wonder if she made the right choice. I didn't know what to answer. Richard finished his drink and walked to the door. The next meeting is in 2 weeks. If you intend to continue participating, I suggest you study more. Douglas can help you understand the financial reports. I do intend to continue. Yes, I replied. Same for Emma and for Sophia. He nodded briefly. Michael liked you, which is surprising. He rarely approves of anyone who doesn't have at least 2 degrees from elite universities. I got lucky then. Luck has nothing to do with it. Michael is a good judge of character. He hesitated at the door. Sophia was too. I returned home that day feeling the weight of responsibility I had inherited. This wasn't just about money or shares. It was a legacy, a chance to make a difference on a level I never imagined possible. When I picked Emma up from the neighbor's house, she ran into my arms, asking how my day had been. Daddy learned. Many things today, I replied, hugging her tight. Things your mum wanted me to know. 3 months passed quickly. With Douglas's help, I steadily learned the basics of corporate finance and Hampton Technologies' business model. Michael became an unexpected ally, often meeting me for lunch to explain the company's history and inner workings. You know, Sophia used to talk about you all the time at the office, he mentioned during one of our meetings. The famous baker who captured her heart. We practically knew you before we even met you. This revelation caught me off guard. She talked about me. She brought your bread to the office sometimes. People would line up at her door to taste it. He smiled at the memory. Sophia always had this quality, the ability to live fully in multiple worlds without losing herself in any of them. I was starting to see a side of Sophia I hadn't known, the corporate executive, the visionary businesswoman, the bridge between worlds. Meanwhile, Emma was spending more time with her grandparents. Patricia had transformed one of the rooms in the Hampton mansion into a space for Emma, filled with toys and books. I was hesitant at first, but seeing my daughter's excitement when talking about these visits made it hard to object. Grandpa showed me Mommy's old room, she told me one evening after returning from the Hampton mansion. She had lots of trophies and pretty things. Your mum was very smart, I said, tucking her into bed. She won many competitions when she was young. Like math contests? Emma asked, her eyes wide with wonder. Yes, and science fairs too. I paused, realizing how little I knew about Sophia's childhood achievements. Maybe next time you visit, you can ask Grandpa to tell you more stories about her. The next board meeting approached quickly. This time, I prepared thoroughly, studying the reports on the factory situation and developing a list of questions. I even visited the Hampton Technologies website, reading about their history and mission statement. The night before the meeting, I received an unexpected call from Richard. Sebhaka, I need to speak with you before tomorrow's meeting, he said without preamble. Can you come to the office an hour early? The next morning, I arrived at Hampton Technologies headquarters feeling considerably more confident than during my first visit. The receptionist recognized me and directed me straight to Richard's private office, a large corner room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Richard was standing by the window, looking older and more tired than I remembered. Thank you for coming early, he said, gesturing toward a chair. What's this about? I asked, remaining standing. The factory. He sighed, turning to face me. I visited it myself last week. Spent a day walking the floor, talking to the workers. It was the first time I'd been there in nearly a decade. This surprised me. And you were right. The admission seemed difficult for him. These aren't just numbers on a spreadsheet. These are people who've committed their lives to my company. People with families, with mortgages, with children in college. He walked to his desk and picked up a folder. This is Jennifer's report on alternatives to closing. The factory. It's a mixed bag, some promising ideas, some impractical ones. He handed me the folder. I want your perspective. I took the folder cautiously. Why me? I'm not a business expert. Because you see things from a different angle. Because you... He hesitated. You remind me of Sophia. She would have fought for these. People too. For the next hour, we went through the report together. Jennifer had outlined several options, from partial automation to repurposing the facility for a new product line. None fully achieved the targeted cost savings, but several came close. What do you think? Richard asked when we finished. I think option 3 has potential, I replied, pointing to the plan that involved modernizing the most critical equipment while maintaining most of the workforce. The initial investment is higher, but the long-term savings are sustainable, and it preserves over 300 jobs. Richard nodded slowly. That was my assessment as well. The board meeting that followed was a stark contrast to my first experience. When the factory issue came up, Richard presented Jennifer's report and recommended option 3, the modernization plan. Jennifer looked surprised, but quickly composed herself, providing additional financial details to support the recommendation. Evelyn Blackwood, who had been dismissive of me at the first meeting, raised objections about the initial capital expenditure. We're sacrificing immediate shareholder value for uncertain long-term gains, she argued. I found myself speaking up. Ms. Blackwood, have you considered the cost of closing that factory? Not just the severance packages, but the community impact fee, the PR damage, the loss of skilled workers who understand our products better than anyone. The room went silent. I continued, my voice growing more confident. I've spent the last week studying Hampton Technologies' history. This company was built on innovation and respect for its people. The founder, I nodded toward Richard, Sias understood that loyal employees create superior products. We're not just preserving jobs, we're preserving the company's soul. Michael caught my eye across the table and gave a subtle nod of approval. I had clearly surprised the room. They hadn't expected the baker to come prepared with a business argument. The modernization plan passed by a slim margin. After the meeting, several board members approached me with newfound respect, asking questions about my perspective on other company matters. Richard pulled me aside as people were leaving. You did your homework, he said, a hint of approval in his voice. I had good teachers, I replied, thinking of Douglas and Michael. There's something else we need to discuss. Richard, continued he, his tone turning serious. The company's annual charity gala is next month. As a major shareholder, your presence would be appropriate. The invitation caught me off guard. This wasn't just a business meeting. It was entry into the Hampton social world, a sphere I had deliberately avoided during my marriage to Sophia. I'm not sure I belong at something like that, I admitted. Emma would enjoy it, Richard countered. Patricia is already planning to help her choose a dress. The mention of my daughter shifted something in me. Perhaps it was time to stop seeing these worlds as separate and incompatible. For Emma's sake, I needed to embrace all aspects of her heritage. All right, I agreed. We'll be there. The night of the gala, Emma was beside herself with excitement. Patricia had indeed helped her select a beautiful blue dress that matched her eyes, Sophia's eyes. I wore a new suit, purchased at Michael's insistence. You can't wear your funeral suit to a gala, he had insisted, dragging me to his tailor. The Hampton mansion was transformed for the occasion. Hundreds of guests in formal wear mingled in the grand ballroom, many of them casting curious glances in my direction as Richard introduced me. This is Daniel Parker, my late daughter's husband and a significant shareholder in Hampton Technologies, he would say, watching their reactions carefully. Some were openly dismissive once they learned I was a baker. Others, particularly those who had known Sophia, were warmer. sharing stories about her that filled in more pieces of the puzzle that was my late wife. She was brilliant, you know, an older woman told me, introducing herself as Sophia's former mentor. Richard was grooming her to take over the company one day. She had such innovative ideas about corporate responsibility. I didn't know that, I admitted, feeling a pang of loss for the parts of Sophia I never got to know. She changed after she met you, the woman continued. Not in a bad way. She seemed happier, more grounded. Said you reminded her what really mattered in life. Throughout the evening, Emma charmed everyone she met. She moved comfortably among these wealthy, powerful people, showing none of my awkwardness. I watched as she sat with Richard, listening intently as he explained the history behind a painting on the wall. Elizabeth, Sophia's sister, who had always been the most hostile toward me, approached as I was observing them. She belongs in both worlds, she said quietly, following my gaze. Sophia wanted that for her. I turned, surprised by her conciliatory tone. Yes, she did. I was wrong about you, Elizabeth admitted, not meeting my eyes. We all were. I thought you took my sister away from us, but now I see you were the one who brought her back to herself. Before I could respond, Michael joined us, champagne glasses in hand. The board is impressed with you, you know, he said, handing me a drink. Especially after that factory decision, Evelyn Blackwood even admitted, begrudgingly, that your fresh perspective might be valuable. I'm just trying to honor what Sophia would have wanted, I replied. And that's exactly why you're effective, Elizabeth added. You're not caught up in corporate politics or shareholder pressure. You see the company the way Sophia did, as more than just a profit machine. As the evening wound down, I found Emma asleep on a sofa in the library, exhausted from the excitement. Richard found us there as I was preparing to carry her to the car. Let her stay the night, he suggested. Patricia has already prepared her room. You can pick her up tomorrow. A few months earlier, I would have refused immediately, but something had changed. The walls between our worlds were beginning to crumble. All right, I agreed, but I'll be here first thing in the morning. Richard nodded, then hesitated. There's something I've been meaning to show you. He led me through the mansion to a door I hadn't noticed before. This was Sophia's home office. I've kept it exactly as she left it. The room was smaller than I expected, with bookshelves lining the walls and a simple desk by the window. Unlike the opulence of the rest of the mansion, this space felt personal, practical. She used to work here on weekends, Richard explained. Even after she moved out, she would come back to use this room sometimes. I moved around the space slowly, taking in the details, the books on business ethics and sustainable development, the family photos, including several of me and Emma, the half-filled notebook still open on the desk. I didn't know she kept working for the company after we married, I said, surprised. Not officially, Richard replied, but she never stopped caring about Hampton Technologies. She had plans for its future. He pointed to a folder, labeled Vision 2030 on the bookshelf. This was her roadmap for transforming the company into what she called a force for good. I picked up the folder with trembling hands. Inside were detailed plans for corporate responsibility initiatives, ethical business practices, and community investment programs, many similar to the ideas I had been instinctively advocating for at board meetings. She never shared any of this with me, I said quietly. She kept her world separate, Richard replied. Perhaps she thought you wouldn't be interested. Or perhaps she was trying to protect what you had built together from the complications of the Hampton legacy. I looked around the room again, feeling both closer to Sophia and more distant than ever. There was so much about her I hadn't known, so many parts of her life she had kept compartmentalized. I'd like to take this folder, if I may, I said finally. I think it's time to bring her vision to life. Richard nodded. That's why I showed you this room. You're uniquely positioned to bridge these worlds, Daniel. You understand both the Hampton legacy and the values Sophia cherished beyond wealth and power. As I drove home that night, the folder on the passenger seat beside me, I felt a strange sense of purpose taking shape. I wasn't just a baker who accidentally became a shareholder. I was the guardian of Sophia's vision for Emma, for the company, for the future she never got to see. The next day, When I picked up Emma, she was bubbling with stories about her overnight stay. Grandma showed me Mom's old dollhouse, and Grandpa said I can have riding lessons like Mom used to. "Would you like that, sweetheart?" I asked, watching her face light up. "Yes." "And can we still make bread together on Saturdays?" I smiled, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. "Of course we can. Always." That weekend, as Emma and I kneaded dough side by side in the bakery kitchen, flour dusting our cheeks, I realized we were living exactly what Sophia had hoped for, a life that embraced both worlds, finding value and joy in each. The following month, I immersed myself in Sophia's Vision 2030 folder. Her plans were comprehensive and ambitious, transforming Hampton Technologies into a company that balanced profit with purpose. I was struck by how much thought she had put into this vision, even while keeping it separate from our home life. With Douglas's guidance, I began mapping out how these ideas could be implemented. Michael joined our discussions often, providing invaluable context about the company's operations. During this time, Emma split her weekends between helping me at the bakery and visiting her grandparents, a balance that seemed to delight her. "I saw Mum's trophies today," she told me one Sunday evening after returning from the Hamptons. "Thy grandpa says I have her brain." "You definitely do," I agreed, tucking her into bed. "You have her determination too. But Grandma says I have your heart," she added sleepily. Those words stayed with me as I prepared for the next board meeting. This time I wasn't just attending, I was presenting a proposal based on Sophia's vision. The morning of the meeting, I stood before the mirror adjusting my tie. 6 months ago, I would have been terrified at the prospect of addressing a room full of executives. Now I felt something different: purpose. When I entered the boardroom, Richard was already there, reviewing documents. He looked up as I approached. "Ready for today?" he asked, his tone neutral but his eyes watchful. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied. The room gradually filled with board members. I noticed Evelyn Blackwood studying me with calculation, rather than outright dismissal, a small improvement. Jennifer Zhao nodded briefly in my direction, another minor victory. Richard opened the meeting with standard business updates before turning the floor over to me. "And today, Mr. Parker will present a strategic initiative for our consideration." Taking a deep breath, I stood and distributed the folders I'd prepared. "Ladies and gentlemen, what I'm proposing isn't new. In fact, it was conceived by Sophia Hampton Parker several years ago." I opened my own folder, revealing Sophia's meticulous notes and diagrams. So she called it Vision 2030, a roadmap to transform Hampton Technologies into a leader in corporate responsibility while enhancing our long-term profitability. I outlined the core components: ethical supply chain management, employee development programs, community investment initiatives, and sustainable manufacturing practices. With each point, I connected Sophia's ideals to concrete business benefits: reduced turnover, enhanced brand reputation, consumer loyalty, and operational efficiency. The modernization of the Millfield factory was a first step, I explained. Now I propose we implement the full vision, starting with 3 pilot initiatives. I detailed each one, complete with budget projections and expected outcomes. When I finished, the room was quiet. I had expected immediate opposition, particularly from Evelyn, but instead found thoughtful consideration on most faces. Jennifer was the first to speak. "The financial projections are ambitious. What makes you believe these social initiatives will generate the returns you're suggesting?" I had anticipated this question, because they already have, on a smaller scale. The Millfield modernization not only preserved jobs, but increased production efficiency by 12% in just 2 months. Employee satisfaction scores rose 23%. These aren't just feel-good metrics, they're business drivers. "This would be a significant shift in our corporate identity," Evelyn noted, her tone carefully neutral. "Now some shareholders might resist. Some will," I acknowledged, "but others will recognize that the market is changing. Consumers increasingly support companies that align with their values. Employees perform better when they believe in their employer's mission. This isn't charity, it's strategic positioning for the future." Richard, who had remained silent throughout my presentation, finally spoke. I've reviewed this proposal thoroughly. It's sound, forward-thinking, fair and true to the founding principles of Hampton Technologies. He looked around the table. Before we vote, I should mention that Michael and I support this initiative. Elizabeth does as well, though she couldn't be here today. The ensuing discussion was vigorous but respectful. To my surprise, even skeptical board members engaged with the ideas rather than dismissing them outright. Finally, Richard called for a vote. The proposal passed 8-4, not unanimous, but a clear mandate. As the meeting adjourned, Jennifer approached me. "That was impressive," she admitted reluctantly. "You've done your homework." "I had excellent source material," I replied, thinking of Sophia's detailed plans. Richard asked me to stay behind. When we were alone, he poured 2 glasses of scotch, handing one to me. "Sophia would be proud," he said quietly. "You've accomplished in 6 months what she struggled to initiate for years." "Only because you gave me the platform," I pointed out. "You could have blocked this at any stage." He swirled the amber liquid in his glass. "Perhaps I'm getting sentimental in my old age, or perhaps I'm finally seeing what she saw all along, that a company's true value isn't measured solely by its market capitalization." We stood in silence for a moment, each lost in thoughts of Sophia. "I have another proposition for you," Richard said finally. "The board is creating a new position, Director of Corporate Responsibility. The role would oversee the implementation of these initiatives, reporting directly to me." He looked at me directly. "I want you to consider taking it." The offer stunned me. "Me? I'm a baker, not an executive. You're also the most qualified person for this particular position." Richard set down his glass. "You understand both worlds, the practical reality of running a small business and the vision needed for a large corporation. You have Sophia's idealism balanced with your own pragmatism." "I can't abandon the bakery," I said, thinking of the business I'd built from nothing. "No one's asking you to. The position would be part-time initially. 3 days at the office, 2 days at the bakery." He'd clearly thought this through. "Rita already manages the place when you're not there, doesn't she?" He was right. Since I'd started attending board meetings, Rita had taken on more responsibilities at the bakery, proving herself more than capable. "And Emma?" I asked. "I won't sacrifice my time with her." "Of course not. We can schedule around school hours. Ensure you're never traveling when she needs you." Richard hesitated. "In fact, Patricia suggested converting one of the offices near mine into a study space for Emma. She could come to the building after school, do her homework there until you're finished." The thought of Emma having a place in both worlds, just as Sophia had wanted, was compelling. "I'll consider it," I promised, "but I need to talk to Emma first and Rita." That evening, I discussed the opportunity with Rita, who responded with characteristic directness. "About time they recognized what you bring to the table," she said, wiping flour from her hands. "I've been practically running this place anyway when you're at those fancy meetings. Make it official. Manager with a capital M, and I'm in." Emma was equally enthusiastic when I explained the situation in terms she could understand. "So you'd help run Grandpa's company and our bakery," she clarified, her eyes wide. "Like a superhero with 2 jobs. I laughed. "I'm not exactly a superhero, sweetheart, and it would mean some changes for us. I'd be at the office more often." "But I could come see you there," she said, "and help Grandma and still make bread on weekends." "That's the plan." She considered this solemnly before breaking into a smile. "I think Mommy would like that. She always said we should try new things." 2 weeks later, I accepted the position. The announcement generated considerable media interest. The baker who became a corporate director made for compelling headlines. Most coverage was positive, though some financial analysts questioned my qualifications. My first day as Director of Corporate Responsibility was surreal. I arrived at Hampton Technologies in my new suit, my third, a far cry from the funeral suit I'd worn to my first board meeting, carrying a briefcase Douglas had insisted I needed. The security guard greeted me by name, escorting me to my new office, a spacious room with city views not far from Richard's. On my desk stood a framed photo of Emma and a smaller one of Sophia holding our newborn daughter. Beside them was a third frame containing a handwritten note I recognized as Sophia's handwriting. Success isn't measured by what we achieve for ourselves, but by the positive impact we create in others' lives. I traced the words with my finger, wondering if Richard had placed it there. My first task was assembling a team to implement the initial phase of Vision 2030. With Richard's approval, I recruited from unexpected places, an environmental scientist from the EPA, community organizer from Millfield, a young MBA with expertise in sustainable supply chains. Within a month, we had concrete plans for all 3 pilot programs. The Millfield factory, once slated for closure, became our showcase. We invested in green technology, established a technical training program for local youth, and created a small business incubator in a disused section of the building. Production efficiency continued to improve, and employee retention reached record levels. 6 months into my new role, we invited the entire board to tour the transformed facility. Evelyn Blackwood, who had voted against my proposal, studied the operations with sharp eyes. I was skeptical, she admitted, as we watched newly trained apprentices working alongside veteran employees. But the numbers don't lie. You've turned this place around. Not me, I corrected her. These people did. They just needed the opportunity and resources. By the end of my first year as director, all 3 pilot programs were exceeding projections. The Hampton Technologies stock price had risen steadily, silencing most financial critics. More importantly, the company culture was changing. Employees spoke about purpose alongside profit, community alongside competition. One evening, as I was preparing to leave the office, Richard appeared in my doorway. "Got a minute?" he asked, looking uncharacteristically hesitant. "Of course." I gestured to the chair across from my desk. He sat heavily, seeming suddenly every bit his age. "The board received an acquisition offer today from Archer Global." My stomach tightened. Archer Global was notorious for buying companies, stripping their assets, and discarding what remained. "How serious is it?" "Very, 20% above current market value." Richard ran a hand through his silver hair. "Some board members find it compelling. Evelyn is pushing hard for consideration. And you. I built this company from nothing, Parker. Watched it grow for 40 years. His voice had a ragged edge. "The idea of selling it to corporate raiders who'll dismantle everything we've built." He shook his head. "But I'm just one vote. Even with you, Michael, and Elizabeth on my side, we'd need to convince at least 2 others to reject the offer." I thought of the workers at Millfield, the new apprentices just starting their careers, the communities that depended on Hampton Technologies, and I thought of Sophia's vision, just beginning to take root. "Then we'll convince them," I said firmly. "We'll show them that what we're building is worth more than a one-time payout." Richard studied me with something like wonder. "You know, when Sophia first brought you home, I saw only what you lacked: education, connections, wealth. I never looked deeper to see what you possessed that we Hamptons had lost somewhere along the way." "And what's that?" I asked. "Quietly, conviction. The courage to stand for what matters, regardless of what's expedient." He stood, his resolve visibly strengthening. "Let's fight this together, Daniel, for Sophia's vision, for Emma's future, for the company's soul." As he left my office, I turned to the photograph of Sophia. In the golden light of sunset streaming through the window, her smile seemed particularly vibrant, as if she could see the unlikely alliance her father and I had formed, the bridge between worlds we were building together. That evening, when I picked up Emma from her study space near Richard's office, she showed me the project she'd been working on, a drawing of our family. But unlike her earlier pictures, this one included not just me and her, but Richard, Patricia, Michael, and Elizabeth, and floating above us all, with a radiant smile, was Sophia. "See, Daddy," she said, pointing to the figures holding her hands. "We're all together now, just like Mommy wanted." Looking at my daughter's innocent wisdom, I felt a profound sense of peace. The path forward wouldn't be easy. Convincing the board to reject Archer Global's offer would be a fierce battle, but for the first time, I truly believed in the possibility of uniting these seemingly incompatible worlds. the baker and the billionaire, working side by side to preserve a legacy greater than either of us had imagined. The next 6 months were a whirlwind of activity as we prepared for the crucial board vote on Archer Global's acquisition offer. Richard and I formed an unlikely but effective alliance, working late into evenings, strategizing how to convince the remaining board members. "These people respect numbers above all," Richard said one night as we reviewed financial projections in his office. "We need to prove that our long-term vision delivers greater value than Archer's immediate payout." We assembled a comprehensive presentation showing 5-year projections for Hampton Technologies under our corporate responsibility, plan versus the likely aftermath of an Archer acquisition. Michael led a team analyzing similar takeovers, documenting how Archer systematically dismantled acquired companies. 2 weeks before the vote, we gathered a small group of key allies for dinner at Richard's home. Emma was there too, playing chess with Patricia in the corner while the adults discussed strategy. Watching my daughter move pieces confidently across the board, teaching her grandmother a tactic she'd learned from her grandfather, I felt a profound sense of rightness. In this blended family we'd created, Elizabeth joined our conversation, having just returned from meetings with major institutional investors. "The feedback is encouraging," she reported. Several expressed concerns about Archer's track record. "If we can demonstrate our plan offers comparable returns with greater stability, they'll back us." Jennifer Zhao, who had gradually become an ally, nodded thoughtfully. "The employee stock ownership program you're proposing is particularly compelling. It aligns workforce interests directly with shareholder value." By midnight, we had refined our approach, identifying the 2 swing votes we needed to secure: Evelyn Blackwood and Thomas Chen, a longtime board member who rarely revealed his position before voting. "I'll talk to Thomas," Richard volunteered. "We go back 30 years. He respects tradition and legacy." "And I'll take Evelyn," I said, surprising myself with my confidence. "I think I understand what matters to her." The next day, I invited Evelyn to visit the Millfield factory with me. She accepted with obvious skepticism, but kept an open mind as we toured the facility. I'd arranged for her to speak directly with employees and local business leaders who had benefited from our initiatives. "These programs aren't just about social good," I explained as we observed the training center in action. "They're creating a talent pipeline that's saving us millions in recruitment and reducing turnover to nearly 0. That's value a takeover can't replicate." By the end of the day, I could see her calculating mind reassessing the situation. "I've been focused on quarterly returns for so long," she admitted, as we drove back to the city. "Perhaps I've undervalued long-term sustainability." It wasn't a commitment, but it was progress. The morning of the vote arrived with a tense atmosphere permeating Hampton Technologies headquarters. Board members gathered in the main conference room, where Richard and I had prepared detailed packets supporting our recommendation to reject Archer's offer. "Before we begin," Richard announced, "I'd like Mr. Parker to present our alternative vision." Standing before the board, I felt the weight of the moment. This wasn't just about a company anymore. It was about honoring Sophia's legacy, securing Emma's inheritance, and protecting thousands of jobs. 2 years ago, I entered this room as an outsider, I began. A baker who inherited shares through circumstances none of us could have predicted. I knew nothing about running a corporation, but I did know something about building community, about the dignity of work, and about creating value that transcends financial statements. I outlined our vision, transforming Hampton Technologies into a benefit corporation that balanced profit with purpose, maintaining strong returns while advancing social and environmental goals. I presented concrete examples from our pilot programs, showing how this approach had already enhanced value. Archer Global is offering a premium today because they recognize the true worth of what we've built, I concluded. But they'll dismantle it tomorrow. We're offering something more enduring, a company that honors its past while embracing a responsible future, a company Sophia Hampton Parker believed in. When I finished, Richard called for discussion. The debate was vigorous but respectful, with board members genuinely engaging with both options. Finally, it was time to vote. Those in favor of accepting Archer Global's acquisition offer. 3 hands rose, those opposed. Richard's hand, mine, Michael's, Elizabeth's, Jennifer's. Then, after a moment's hesitation, Evelyn's, and finally Thomas Chen's. Motion to reject. The offer passes, Richard announced, relief evident in his voice. Now to the second proposal, converting Hampton Technologies to a benefit corporation structure. This vote was closer, but ultimately passed 7-6. As the meeting adjourned, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. We had preserved something precious, not just a company, but a vision of business as a force for good. Richard approached me as the room cleared. "We did it," he said quietly. "Sophia would be proud." "Yes, she would," I agreed. Of both of us. The transformation of Hampton Technologies from a traditional corporation to a benefit corporation made headlines across the business world. Some analysts predicted doom, others hailed it as visionary leadership. Our stock price fluctuated initially, but stabilized as we implemented our plans with transparency and discipline. 6 months later, we hosted a formal event to commemorate the company's new direction. Employees, community partners, and investors gathered. In the atrium of Hampton headquarters, Emma stood between Richard and me as we unveiled a plaque dedicated to Sophia. "In memory of Sophia Hampton Parker," it read, "whose vision guides our journey toward business that serves humanity while creating enduring value." After the ceremony, Richard took me aside. "There's something I need to discuss with Hai." "Tayokai," he said, his expression serious. "I've been thinking about succession planning." At 73, Richard had begun considering the future leadership of Hampton Technologies. "Michael has the expertise but lacks interest in the CEO position," he explained. "Elizabeth prefers her role in strategy. I've been considering external candidates, but none seem right for what we're building." I waited, sensing where this might be heading but hardly believing it. "I'd like to propose you as my eventual successor," he said finally. "Not immediately, you still have much to learn, but over the next 5 years, I could mentor you, prepare you to take the helm." The proposal was so far beyond anything I could have imagined that I laughed in shock. "Now, Richard, I was a baker 3 years ago, and now you're the heart of this company's transformation," he countered. "You have something rare, Daniel, the ability to see both the forest and the trees, to balance idealism with practicality. You'd have strong executives like Jennifer, handling the technical aspects you haven't mastered. But the vision, the values, those you already embody." "I need time to think about this," I said honestly. "Of course. It's not a decision to make lightly." That evening, I took Emma for ice cream, our tradition when we needed to have important conversations. "Grandpa wants me to run the company someday," I told her as she tackled a massive sundae. "What do you think about that?" She considered the question with surprising seriousness for a 9-year-old. "Would you still make bread sometimes?" I smiled. "Yes, I'd still make bread sometimes." "Then I think it's good," she decided. "Mom's company should be run by someone who knows how to make things with their hands, not just numbers and stuff." Her simple wisdom struck me deeply. Perhaps that had been Sophia's insight all along, that Hampton Technologies needed leadership that understood value beyond balance sheets, that recognized the human element in every business decision. 2 days later, I accepted Richard's proposal with one condition: that the bakery would remain open, with me still making bread there every Saturday morning with Emma. He agreed without hesitation. Over the next 3 years, Hampton Technologies flourished under our shared leadership. The corporate responsibility initiatives expanded globally. Profits grew steadily, if not spectacularly. Most importantly, we built a company culture that valued people alongside productivity. On the 5th anniversary of Sophia's death, we gathered at her grave, not just Richard, Patricia, and I with Emma, but also Michael, Elizabeth, and even some board members who had become something like family. Emma, now 11, placed sunflowers, her mother's favorite, on the headstone. "She would have loved seeing you all here together," Patricia said, her voice thick with emotion. Later that day, Richard officially announced his retirement and my appointment as CEO, effective in 6 months. The business press reacted with surprise, but the employees celebrated. I had become a trusted figure throughout the company. From baker to CEO in 5 years, Michael teased at the small family dinner that evening. That must be some kind of record. It's not about me, I replied, watching Emma laugh with her cousins, Michael's children, across the room. It's about continuing what Sophia started. Richard raised his glass. To Sophia, who saw what we couldn't, that this man we rejected would be the one to unite our family and transform our company. And to Daniel, Elizabeth added, Thanks, who proved that success isn't measured by where you come from, but by what you stand for. As the evening wound down, I stepped onto the terrace of the Hampton mansion, a place where I had once felt so unwelcome, now almost a second home. The night was clear, stars visible despite the city lights. Emma joined me, slipping her hand into mine. I'm proud of you, Daddy, she said. I'm proud of us, sweetheart. We've come a long way, haven't we? She nodded, looking up at the stars. Do you think Mom can see us? I like to think she can, I said softly, and that she's happy with how things turned out. We stood in comfortable silence, my baker's hands holding my daughter's delicate fingers. Behind us, the sounds of family conversation drifted through open doors. The Hamptons and the Parkers, they once divided by wealth and status, now united by something stronger. I thought about the journey that had brought us here, how I had been rejected from the start, called a gold digger because I was poor and marrying a billionaire's daughter, how when Sophia died shortly after we separated, I had quietly raised our daughter with the sweat of my labor, never expecting anything more than the joy of watching Emma grow. And then the day of the will reading, when they discovered not just Sophia's generosity, but her wisdom, her understanding that what Emma needed most wasn't wealth or privilege, but the values that would guide her through life. Looking at my daughter now, I could see both sides of her heritage in perfect balance: the Hampton determination and business acumen, the Parker compassion and practical wisdom. She would inherit not just wealth but purpose, not just opportunity but responsibility. Let's go back inside, Emma said after a while. Grandpa's telling stories about Mom when she was little. As we turned to rejoin the family, I felt a profound sense of completion. The worlds that had once seemed so incompatible had found harmony. The rejection that once stung so deeply had transformed into acceptance and respect. The loss that had broken our hearts had somehow led to healing beyond what any of us could have imagined. They had rejected me from the beginning, called me a gold digger and an opportunist. But in the end, what mattered wasn't the money or the power or even the vindication. What mattered was that Emma would grow up surrounded by love from both sides of her family, carrying forward the best of her mother's legacy. And perhaps that had been Sophia's plan all along, not a revenge, not even a lesson, but a final, loving gift to all of us, the chance to become better than we had been together. We faced the challenges, professional, financial, familial, and found a path forward that honors both innovation and tradition. That's no small achievement. As darkness settled around us, I thought about all that had unfolded since that painful wedding reception, the building of AgriSmart, the creation of AgriFund, the Harrison Farms crisis, the unexpected partnership with Chamberlain, and now the possibility of leading an agricultural enterprise that could influence farming practices across multiple states. None of it had followed the script I might have written for myself. The path had been more difficult, more complex, and ultimately more rewarding than any I could have imagined when standing humiliated at my own wedding reception 4 years earlier. Victor's cutting words that night, "Never seen a promising future for you," had once been a source of deep hurt and resentment. Now they seemed like the opening line of a story neither of us could have anticipated, a story of transformation, growth, and unexpected collaboration. The man who had once dismissed my prospects was now entrusting me with his family's legacy and acknowledging me as part of his own. As Catherine's soft cries came through the baby monitor, Isabella rose to tend to our daughter. I remained on the porch a moment longer, contemplating the fields visible in the distance under the rising moon. The past 4 years had taught me something profound. True success wasn't measured in acquisitions, innovations, or even vindication of past slights. It was found in creating something enduring, systems that honored the land, relationships that bridged divides, and a legacy worth passing to the next generation. When I finally joined Isabella in the nursery, watching as she gently rocked our daughter back to sleep, I felt a deep contentment that transcended professional achievements. In building something meaningful for Catherine's future, I had found something I hadn't even known I was seeking, not just proof that Victor Harrison had been wrong about me, but the wisdom to understand that being right had never been the point. The future stretched before us now, full of promise and possibility, a future far richer and more complex than the one I had once defended on my wedding night. And while that future would undoubtedly hold new challenges, I faced them with the confidence of someone who had already weathered significant storms and emerged stronger for the experience. After all, as farmers have known for generations, the most bountiful harvests often come after the most difficult seasons,